Hello and welcome to Playback, Tier 2 World's weekly showcase of our best stories from around the globe. Coming up, after almost 2 decades, the U.S. deployment to Afghanistan has ended. We take a look back at America's longest-running war. Gaza's first rock band gives voice to the pain of war in the Palestinian territory. Slovenia's extensive cave systems help the country's tourism industry survive the pandemic. And turning dumping grounds into green spaces. A look at the mission to neaten up Nairobi. After almost 2 decades, the deaths of more than 2,000 soldiers and 100,000 civilian casualties, the U.S. deployment to Afghanistan has ended. Melinda Nucifora looks back at America's longest-running war.
What started as an operation called Enduring Freedom has descended into a battle of endurance. The US entered Afghanistan in 2001 to quash al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Al-Qaeda was behind the September 11 terrorist attacks, and the US blamed the Taliban for providing its militants with sanctuary. Within months, Taliban-controlled territories began to fall.
Thanks to our military and our allies, and the brave fighters of Afghanistan, the Taliban regime is coming to an end.
But the fighting didn't. The original deployment of about 1,000 troops in 2001 swelled to 10,000 by the end of the following year. It was so confident of its success that in 2003, the US turned its attention elsewhere and launched another war, this time in Iraq. The distraction enabled the Taliban to regroup and security deteriorated. Barack Obama campaigned against the war during the 2008 presidential race, but when he took office in 2009, he was compelled to act against the Taliban's advances. He increased troop numbers to 70,000 and within months to 100,000. But his administration still insisted the war was coming to an end.
Beginning to transfer security responsibility to the Afghans in summer 2011 is critical and, in my view, achievable.
The killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011 boosted American confidence, and by 2014, President Obama declared victory was imminent.
And by the end of this year, the transition will be complete, and Afghans will take full responsibility for their security, and our combat mission will be over.
But it wasn't, and the war dragged on. In February 2020, a third US President, Donald Trump, struck a historic peace agreement with the Taliban, setting the stage for a permanent exit. By the middle of this year, there were about 2,500 US soldiers on the ground. During the 2-decade-long conflict, more than 775,000 American troops have been deployed. More than 2,000 died and well over 20,000 were wounded. Since 2009, when UN monitoring began, at least 100,000 Afghan civilians have been killed or injured. But in May, the Taliban began to regain territory in the north. As the US troop withdrawal continued, they moved in to fill the void. By August, President Ashraf Ghani had fled the country, Kabul had fallen, and after America's 20-year war, the Taliban was back in control of Afghanistan. Melinda Nucifora, TRT World.
Now, imagine going to labor 10,000 meters in the air. Well, that's exactly what happened to 26-year-old Somon Nouri. The Afghan refugee gave birth to a healthy baby girl as the evacuation flight she was on cruised through Kuwaiti airspace on its way to the UK. With no doctor on board, the baby was delivered by members of the Turkish Airlines cabin crew. Nouri has decided to name her daughter Havva, the Turkish word for air.
Among the various training we receive is midwifery. During our flight today, we had a passenger who said that she was pregnant and had labour pain. As a team, we made the necessary intervention, and as a result, the mother gave birth to a healthy and very beautiful baby.
Mount Nyiragongo is one of the world's most active volcanoes, and it has had 3 major eruptions in the past 50 years. The fast-moving lava has killed hundreds of people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and continuously threatens the communities around it. As Leila Humeira reports, many people are still living in misery after the latest eruption in May.
Here in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, many people have been displaced and left homeless for months by the eruption of a volcano.
I
live in suffering, hunger. We don't have houses, and all my fields were burned by the lava.
The May eruption of Mount Nyiragongo killed more than 30 people and forced hundreds of thousands to flee. Most have returned home, but officials report more than 20,000 have lost their homes and crops to the lava, and more than 30,000 remain displaced. Those staying in this camp live in tents made of sticks and plastic bags as they wait for help from the government. Sifa Asikuye lives with her 2 grandchildren and says her family is not protected from the elements.
When it rains, I don't move from here. I don't have anything to cover myself with, no blankets, and I spend the night here.
The UN is providing aid, but it's slow going because many of those in need have yet to be registered for benefits. And public trust in both the UN and the government is low due to growing instability and violence by armed groups in the region. These people say they just don't feel safe.
We don't have anything to do. We don't have houses. We don't have fields to cultivate. We live in misery. We don't understand our Congolese government.
With frequent rains and overcrowding, the risk of a cholera outbreak is high.
We're in an area where the rains are always here, even during the dry season. So there will always be the problem of waterborne diseases. This is what should concern the Congolese government.
For now, the rain makes it hard to sleep, but this is just one of many problems for the displaced. Laila Humaira, TRT World.
2 weeks ago, the Israeli government announced it would approve the construction of more than 800 Palestinian homes, along with 2,000 Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. But the meeting to greenlight these plans has been delayed indefinitely. Mustafa Fatih Yavuz reports.
67-year-old Ali Salim is a Palestinian living in Al Khadr village in the occupied West Bank. He has 20 children. Israel has demolished his house several times over the years. Israeli bulldozers crushed his one leg during one demolition. It later had to be amputated. He had already had another leg amputated due to diabetes. Ali applied for permission to Israeli authorities for the current house he lives in. But he says Israeli authorities sidestepped the issue.
I think the most important thing for me now is to stay on my land to ensure I get the permission. If they give us permission, the whole area will get permission. I don't care about myself. I care about other Palestinians. They are suffocated.
Last week, Israel was planning to approve more than 850 Palestinian constructions in Area C, which makes up around 60% of the occupied West Bank that is fully under Israeli military control. But that approval has now been delayed. The Defense Ministry's civil administration says it's due to a labor dispute by civilians working in the ministry. Official figures show approval of Palestinian constructions is very rare. Between 2016 and 2018, Israel only accepted 2% of Palestinian applications. The Israeli government was also expected to greenlight more than 2,200 Israeli settlement homes in the same area. Settler leader David El-Hayani says he is thankful to the government for its intention, but many more settlements still need to be approved.
It's not enough. It's been 7 months and there was no meeting of the council. This committee actually approves the plans. They were supposed to approve over 3,500.
But unlike El-Hayani, some parties that make up the new government are not happy. The Israeli government has for years pushed for more Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. But groups who oppose this policy, like the Meretz party, now have a place in the ruling coalition government. And their voices are calling for more concessions for the Palestinian people. Ali and his family has an uncertain future. But one thing is clear, his family and future generations will remain here forever. Mustafa Fatih's TRT World, occupied West Bank.
Yemen's civil war is now in its 6th year, and despite international efforts to find a solution, there appears to be no end in sight. In the war-torn Hajj government, there are fears that polio vaccine shortages are putting local children at risk. Taiba Aydin has the story.
Ali Tayyib was displaced from his home in Hajj 6 years ago when civil war broke out in Yemen. He and his family live in a refugee camp where they only have access to basic sanitation and services. He fears that his infant daughter Zainab isn't receiving the early childhood healthcare she needs to protect her in the future.
My daughter hasn't taken any of the vaccine that children should take in the first 40 days, whether it's the polio, measles or hepatitis vaccine. In this area and for nearly 3 years, we haven't received any vaccines. My daughter, niece and our children are suffering, and we are very concerned that they could catch any disease like polio in future.
Last summer, Yemen saw its first polio outbreak in 15 years. The health system there has deteriorated and humanitarian organizations have had limited access. Medical workers fear large-scale outbreaks of communicable diseases, particularly polio, if the situation doesn't improve.
We receive around 100 children on a daily basis throughout the week. The most concerning problem is the lack of vaccines. Since the war started, this area hasn't received any kind of vaccine. Last year, there was news of polio spreads in Abs district near us in the Houthi-led area. We have been calling for help from the local authorities and the Ministry of Health in Aden, but we haven't received any vaccines yet.
UNICEF says concerns over the safety of staff have prevented vaccinators from working there for the last 2 years.
We have the numbers, we have the figures. Around 2,450 children under the age of 1 in these liberated areas of North Hajj haven't received any vaccines, and around 8,900 kids haven't received any kind of vaccines.
For Yemeni civilians who've endured violence and displacement, the threat of curable and treatable disease is emerging as the latest consequence of war. Taiba Aydin, TRT World.
The UN says the use of leaded petrol in the world is over after the last country, Algeria, finished its remaining stocks last month. It comes after a 19-year campaign in collaboration with governments, businesses and civic groups to end the use of the poisonous substance. The UN has hailed the achievement and called for similar initiatives to tackle climate change.
Celebrate a milestone for multilateralism, the culmination of a united global effort to rid the world of lead in petrol, a major threat to human and planetary health.
Well, China has banned anyone under the age of 18 from playing video games for more than 3 hours a week in an effort to prevent gaming addiction. Minors can play video games for 1 hour a day between 8 and 9 p.m. and only on Fridays and the weekend. They can also play for an hour at home on public holidays. The restrictions can apply to any devices besides phones. Gaming companies are barred from providing services to people outside the defined hours and are required to introduce real name verification systems. Now, you may find it hard to believe, but Gaza has an English rock band. Rather than hardships and death, they sing about life in the besieged territory. The musicians say they chose the name Osprey 5 because the bird of prey is associated with feelings of pride and freedom. Nazar Sadawi has their story.
4 men from Gaza and a Swiss humanitarian worker formed Osprey V 4 years ago. One of their first songs was called Home, a word that holds special meaning for Palestinians.
Humanity stand up to make home and to create and build instead of destroy and kill, and we're more to send messages of love to the world than sending messages of violence and hatred, because this is not the real Gaza, and this is not what you know, this is not the real picture of Gaza.
The band members say they may have little to work with, but they're determined to create something.
The musicians have overcome many challenges, from a lack of Western music in the largely conservative Gaza to shortage of recording equipment and instruments in a region that's been under an Israeli blockade for a decade.
A lot of times we've suffered from electricity being lacked off. A lot of times we've been suffering from the wars itself that was happening, as anyone in Gaza was suffering any kind of routine, but it was super hard even more for us because we never had a place to practice in, we never had a studio to actually record in. Everything was actually self-made.
Since the band formed back in 2017, its members had worn masks to remain anonymous. But just a few days before Israel's 11-day bombardment of Gaza in May, Osprey V held an online concert to raise funds for Palestinian musicians and decided it was no longer necessary to hide their faces.
Here from Gaza, we could tell the world, hey, we speak the language, we could understand each other.
In the future, Osprey V planned to perform songs with global appeal, such as the importance of looking after the planet and the rights of women and people with disabilities. And one day, instead of war, these musicians hope to sing about peace. Nizar Sadawi, TRT World, Gaza.
And Britney Spears' new attorney, Matthew Rosengart, says that her father is trying to get a payment of nearly $2 million before stepping down from his role as conservator. Rosengart filed a document that said the conservatorship's upcoming scheduled accounting would mean significant payments for his father and could be seen as extortion. James Spears has been in control of Britney's life since 2008. Slovenia is home to some of the most extensive underground cave networks in Europe. As the global tourist industry suffers through the coronavirus pandemic, these spectacular natural features have continued to attract visitors to the country. Rumeysa Chodar explains.
Seasoned cave enthusiast Ludwig Husso is living the cave-in dream. He recently made headlines when he discovered a new 60-meter deep limestone cave in Slovenia's picturesque Kars region. The Central European country is immensely proud of its 14,000 grottos, which make up some of the largest cave networks in the world. One of the most famous, the Postojna cave system, extends for 24 kilometers and is considered the most extensive in Europe.
The caves of Postojna are virtually indispensable, one of the most beautiful, or one could say one of the richest caves in the world when it comes to limestone concretion, the density of stalactites, stalagmites, columns, pillars, draperies, and much more. A great number of cave-dwelling animals, therefore the cradle, if you like, of speleobiology, roughly 150 species.
Not far away, the imposing Predjama Castle, in nestled half in and half out of a cave mouth. The Delenita Cave, its located near the border with Italy, is the oldest shore cave in Europe. Slovenes have been exploring there since 1633, and each year a special literary prize is awarded in its interior. The European Space Agency even uses one cave system, which is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as a location for astronaut training.
Astronauts also know that the cast world is exceptional, special, in a similar way to a space environment can be. It is an unknown environment where you don't know what to expect at your next step. It is interesting and great for tourists, but also for us who work in here.
Despite the slow season of 2021 stunted by the pandemic, Slovenia's underground labyrinths keep the tourism sector afloat, allowing each visitor to be an explorer, even if just for a few hours. Rumeysa Chodar, TRT World.
In Serbia, the number of malnourished and neglected horses arriving at shelters is rising. Many old horses end up being left to die or sold off to slaughterhouses, either because of owner ignorance or due to economic hardship. Now, a sanctuary in the country's south is trying to give back to man's other best friend. Kübra Akkoç has the story.
Pasha was once a mighty stallion. He starred in movies, modeled for magazines and won carriage races. But now the 24-year-old former champ can barely walk and is living out his retirement in Serbia's only sanctuary for horses.
Mostly, the horses that arrive here are worn out and in terrible shape, or ones that are in good physical condition but went through mental torture or have been beaten. There are a variety of cases, but we never turn down an animal because there is no one else to deal with them.
The sight of malnourished horses is not uncommon in the country. Zalchko Iličić says that at least half of the horses in Serbia are not kept in decent conditions. In Belgrade alone, he estimates that some 150 horses live through daily abuse. So despite being allergic to horsehair, the 40-year-old set up a sanctuary 6 years ago. Since then, he has rescued about 70 animals. He relies on monetary donations and the enthusiasm of his volunteers to run the sanctuary.
I came here in 2016 because I wanted to contribute this rare and extraordinary story as much as I could. Little by little, I started coming here more often until I moved here in the end. So the sanctuary became my life.
While the sanctuary is mainly for horses, it has also hosted abandoned donkeys, stray dogs, cats and even a water buffalo. Iličić says you simply can't love one animal and turn your back on another. Kübra Akoç, TRT World.
In the late 1970s, low-income neighborhoods in the Kenyan capital became a dumping ground for the rich. Those who grew up there saw plants and trees disappear beneath mounds of trash. But some members of the community have joined forces to nurture new life in a once neglected part of Nairobi. Sarah Balter has more.
After decades of dumping at a nearby landfill, Dandora, a large slum in Nairobi, reeked of rubbish. But 8 years ago, some of its residents decided it was time for a change.
This is our heart and soul of mustard seeds and the heart of the transformation going on in Nairobi right now. This started in 2013. This was the biggest dump site in my community here around.
Charles Gachanga and his friends founded a non-profit organization to revitalize the area, which is home to about 500,000 people. With funding from international aid groups and a token monthly contribution from neighbors, they've reclaimed a polluted patch of land and turned it into a community garden.
It makes us feel, alive. It makes us feel good. Sometimes we even are able to hear birds that we don't usually hear. So it makes us also want to do more of this, plant more trees maybe, and just bring the forest to the hood.
Local artists say the green space is reshaping Dandora's image. It's available to rent for business events, concerts, and as a backdrop to shoot music videos. The initiative has even motivated some people to turn their lives around. A former gangster, Evans Otieno, has ditched a life of crime in favor of community building.
We try to bring nature closer to the people because nature is very good even for your mental well-being. You see, and considering the Dandora, that mental state that people are thinking of crime, people are just thinking crime and the negative. We try to bring that positive mental setback to the community.
Gachanga's project has inspired a network of similar green spaces in the area, all of which are teaching children to reap the benefits of waste management.
If you can change Dandora, we can change Nairobi. And if we change Nairobi, we can change Kenya, we can change Africa, and possibly a larger part of the world.
They're turning garbage into gardens and planting seeds of hope. Sarah Balter, TRT World.
Cristiano Ronaldo has broken the record for the most goals scored in international men's football. The 36-year-old scored 2 late headers against the Republic of Ireland in World Cup qualifying match. Ronaldo broke the record formerly held by Ali Daei of Iran, who scored 109 goals. Ronaldo is already the top scorer in club football's top tournament, the Champions League. Well, that rounds up your week of news here on Playback. Stay tuned to TRT World for the latest stories.